Welcome, everybody, to a special edition of the Only Podcast, Hockey Edition. This is Chris Vanini, your host, as always, and I'm joined today by Jeremy Dewar. That's how you say your name, right?
Yep.
Jeremy Dewar, one of the Only Colors resident hockey writers, hockey Twitterers, and there's not much to talk about with basketball or football right now. With the hockey team hiring a new coach. Figured this would be a good time to throw up a quick short podcast on what was a pretty big hire for the team. Danton Cole, the former MSU player, the current U.S. development team coach. He was introduced today. Recording this Tuesday. He was introduced today, Tuesday, as a new head coach. I think a hire a lot of people are excited about for a lot of reasons. Perhaps no one is more excited than Jeremy.
So might be true.
You've been calling for this for a few years. I believe Ron Mason kind of vouched for him 6 years ago when they went with Onassis. So your reaction to the Danton Cole hire?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of checks all the boxes of what you'd be looking for, especially at where the program is kind of at this point. There's a couple of good coaches out there that were also included that don't have the connections that Danton does, but I think with where the program is at, it might have been hard to attract some candidates like that. So Danton, with his head coach experience, which is different than the last hire, which is already one box checked, on top of, he coming from the National Team Development Program, as he kind of alluded to in his press conference today, when they start scouting kids for the under 17, under 18 team, they're looking at 13 and 14-year-olds. So that recruiting pipeline isn't going to really dry up just because the 17, 18-year-olds are committed. He's going to have some connections to hopefully take the recruiting a little bit up. I know towards the end of Onassis' tenure, the recruiting was kind of rebounding, but I think Danton can keep that on its track and even bump it up a little bit more. So the next thing is going to be kind of curious. I want to see what he puts together for a staff here, but I think it's pretty exciting to have an alum come back, someone who won a championship here as a player, someone that's got great recruiting connections and a pretty good track record from coaching as well.
Yeah, so he was this isn't his first head coaching job. He coached the Grand Rapids Griffins for a little bit, the Motor City Mechanics, and he was with Alabama Huntsville, which they were kind of a brand new program, right, at the time?
Yeah, he wasn't the first one. The coach before him was Doug Ross, who basically started the program, and then he retired. And when he retired, Danton took it over for a couple of years after being an assistant for one season with Bowling Green. Never had great regular season records, but his last year there, they did end up winning the CHA playoffs and getting into the NCAA tournament and giving a scare to, I think it was Notre Dame, who I think they gave a scare to that season. So not great record so much, but I mean,
but that's a tough program.
The resources of Alabama Huntsville.
Brand new program, Alabama Huntsville. Yeah. You can only do so much.
And at the time, this was when the CHA league that Wayne State had played in and Robert Morris was disbanding. So there's a lot of talk that Huntsville was also going to get rid of their program. So you're in Alabama, you're in a league that's getting rid of itself, and you can't even recruit kids that know that they're going to be there for 4 years. So it was a pretty tough time to be down there. But he went 12-18 his last season. They got on a run and got into the NCAA tournament. But then he, of course, did leave that job, I believe, partially because of the not knowing where the program was going. He took some time away from that job as well.
Yeah, so he goes to the development team. Now explain kind of what, for people who may not know, what exactly this team is. The USA Hockey it's the USA Hockey National Team Development Program.
Yep, so the National Team Development Program was actually started about 20 years ago in the late 90s, and it was Jeff Jackson, who's the coach at Notre Dame, was the first coach that they ever had.
Someone whom some MSU fans called for instead of Rick Comley, correct?
Yeah, yep. He's also an alum, and he was a coach at Lake Superior State, and of course he's now going to be a conference foe with Notre Dame coming to the Big Ten next season.
Oh yeah.
So it's a program that basically got started. USA Hockey really wanted to get together a program that increased, the USA Hockey brand and increased their ability to win international tournaments was one thing. So winning the under-18 championships. You've seen a lot of, the U.S. obviously this year they won the under-21 World Championships back in December. And so winning tournaments like that, it's much easier if you have kids that are kind of cohesively brought through a program together rather than just every year throwing a group together. So they kind of created this program as a place for the top kids in the country to go. They get world-class weight training, on ice program. They all go to high school, and it's based out of Ann Arbor is where it's been, and then it moved to Plymouth this season. So they've been going to high school in the Ann Arbor area. But it really just brings, kids across the country together to one spot. And the USA Hockey gets to have a really big hold on, get their hands in there for how they want it to be developed so that there's a cohesion when it comes to Olympics or when it comes to world championships. A lot of these guys have come now through the NTDP with, coming through there. So the way that it's worked now is they have an under 18 and under 17 team, and the coaches alternate each year so that they stick with their players. So one year, Danton would be the under 17 coach, which is what he was this season. And if he had stayed next season, he'd go to the under 18. And so the teams are a little bit split. The under 17 team plays in some international tournaments, and they play 35 games in the USHL, which is the top junior league in the country. And the under 18 team plays about 25 games in the USHL. They're the team that goes and plays the NCAA team. So when MSU has played the NTDP, that's been the under 18s.
Right.
And then they do the tournaments as well.
Yeah, so MSU fans may be somewhat familiar with the team in the sense that, the time that USA Hockey team comes rolling through, that's what that team is.
Yep, so that's just the under 18s, and they've got a couple of players that have come from it. I know Ed Minnie was in the National Development Program. They've had this season Patrick Kodorenko, who was a freshman, came from the program, and next season Tommy Miller, who is a defenseman right now, is on the NTDP as well. So we've pulled some players out of there. Never a huge amount. It typically leads a lot of kids going to BU, BC. Michigan usually gets a couple because they're right in Ann Arbor.
Right. Well, that was the next thing I was going to bring up. Now, MSU has not typically done very well in recruiting out of there as compared to the likes of back in the CCHA, the days of Michigan, because they're all in Ann Arbor, but they were all in Ann Arbor. Now it's a little off.
Yeah.
or going to, I know they really increased their presence with Notre Dame once Jeff Jackson went there. So is there a hope that pipeline can kind of, MSU can get back to getting a piece of that pie, which they kind of really haven't compared to the other big schools?
I would think so. And like you said, it's really been a long-term thing. I really think when Rick Conway came here, he never really adjusted his recruiting. He was used to going to certain areas when he was with Northern Michigan. He never really readjusted to that, so he never really wanted to challenge the Michigans, the BUs, for a lot of kids coming through this program. I would say I think that we will see an increase in players from the national team looking at MSU, but it might not be the quickest turnaround. I know every kid on the U18 team is already committed. And on the U17, I want to say a good number are. As we've discussed before, just the hockey recruiting cycle being so early.
Yeah. Recruiting, in case people don't know, you recruit these kids like 13, 14 years old, and then you don't even know if they're going to go to college at the time they get to that age. So it's very different than basketball or football or
yeah, absolutely. Just to give you kind of an idea, MSU has commits all the way out to 2021 right now, so they can be pretty far out there. But it's kind of the nature of the beast when kids can get drafted to the OHL at 16, you've got to get your word in there before they get to them. So I think we should see an increase. Like I said, he's talked to the Bantam teams and the midget teams that feed his program. So he knows who the top 13, 14-year-olds are right now because he was looking at putting them into the U.S. program. So I'm sure it should be an easy flip for him just to go from recruiting them to the U.S. program to recruiting for Michigan State now. But yeah, so I would expect to see a little bit of a number increase. I still would say it's not going to probably be – MSU's not going to be the top program to pull out of there. Even – when you look at where the kids come from, it typically is a Massachusetts kid who comes to the program, goes back to Massachusetts to play for BU. So, he'll still be in on the top kids from Michigan that are going to go there and maybe some national kids. That would be exciting, but, it probably will be a year or two down the road since so many of these commitments are already made.
Yeah, and so speaking of that recruiting deal, so Tom Anastas, when he came in, he had some recruiting ties, and it had obviously the recruiting had obviously cratered by the end of the Rick Conley era, and Anastas kind of had to come in and pick up the scraps and reopen relationships. And, he did a decent job, but something I didn't quite know at the time, but in recent years under Anastas, and he basically kept, it sounds like, all of Rick Conley's commits, the ones that had gone way out. And so that's why, 5 years into his tenure, Mark Hollis was saying, we still have, it may be another 5 years and that kind of stuff, which opened a bunch of eyes. How do you think this move affects MSU's recruiting in the short term? Will it at all?
Well, I mean, it sounds like from what
and also, how is the current recruiting? Where is it now with Anastas compared to where it was when he took over?
It's definitely been better. I think the freshmen that came on this year were pretty talented. I think he probably got the best freshman contribution out of any class that he's had this year. And kind of from some unexpected places. I think everyone looked at Kodorenko. He was coming from the national program, assumed he would be the big jump. But Taro Hirose, who he pulled out of the British Columbia League, came in and he was pretty excellent, and got up to like the first line most nights. So I think his recruiting was getting pretty good. Between the class that came on campus last year and then the one that's coming on campus this summer, I'd say those were probably his best two classes, and people have kind of been eyeing the class that's coming on next as the best class that he's had. But still, to put that into perspective, it's not challenging the top 5 to 10 programs and what they're bringing in on campus. Every player that he's probably bringing in next season, I would expect to be a 3 to 4 year player. There's no Jack Eichel, Dylan Larkin, 1 year type of player in this class, which, as Danton Cole alluded to today, that's his vision. Is he wants to say, I will be willing to bring a Dylan Larkin here because if he leaves after 1 year, I'm going to replace him. It's okay. We're going to have a mix of some overagers. We're going to have a mix of a 1 or 2 year player. So, and he had definitely alluded today that he's going to honor all the commitments of the kids coming in for next year, but he is going to sit down and be reviewing where the commitments are at with everyone else in the pipeline. So it sounds like, you have to kind of read between the lines, but it does sound like he may not be on the same plan of honoring all the commitments the way that Anastas did, which to Tom's credit, that's a great thing to do. It is tough, but you got to, as we talk about hockey recruiting being so far out, you're really not leaving the kid high and dry when it's 3 years before he comes to campus to tell him he's got to keep searching. So it was a choice he made. I think he can feel honorable that he did it, but I think he definitely, if you probably asked him, he might wish to do something different to improve his on-ice results. So I would assume that Danton's probably going to evaluate after he's going to let everyone from this class come on, but I don't know if everyone else is going to have their commitment held in future years.
And you mentioned, willing to take the one and done type of guys. I mean, that's what Ron Mason did when MSU was a top 5 team. You had those types of players coming in, and it'll take time and a lot to get back to that level. But it's interesting where kind of recruiting is and where it's fallen off. I mean, man, you're going on 10 years almost since MSU was good at hockey. It's kind of been a lost decade. As you look back at the Anastas era, there were a lot of questions coming in. There were a lot of problems he inherited. He did make the tournament his first year when he had an incredibly senior loaded team.
Right.
I think what stood out to me more than anything else, and I'm curious what stood out to you the most, what went wrong the most was the lack of player development. It never felt like guys got better from year 1 to year 4. I mean, you had guys who were NHL draft picks and never seemed to get to that level. They tended to always play hard. I like the style differences compared to the Comley, dump and chase eras, and some of the Comley teams toward the end were some of the worst passing teams I'd ever seen in my life. And I thought they played hard for Anastas, but they never seemed to really – and they always got up for Michigan, even when they were a bad team. They almost always got up for Michigan, except for that 1 year. The one time they gave up 9 goals at home or something like that. But the players just never got better. What do you think was the biggest problem with the Tom Anastas era?
I think that's certainly fair to talk about a lack of possibly player development. And it was definitely, it kind of manifested itself when we were looking at towards the end of the season. I would talk to people about, is a coaching change going to be made, or who do you think they bring in? And one of the things that we talked about is a lot of times back in the Conway era, what you would hear a lot about was all the guys in the NHL kind of being embarrassed or wanting to donate. I know when Conway was here, a bunch of the NHL alums bought like a sauna and like some, like a hot tub for like the training room for the locker room. And you just don't hear about that anymore. And one of the problems is outside of Torrey Krug and, there's really been no one to make the NHL since Anastas has been here. It's really been Torrey Krug. You can maybe count Derek Grant a little bit, who's kind of a Conway slash, Anastas. I mean, he never was here for Anastas, and he's only been a bubble player. So it's, outside of Torrey, who has been a great success and been, a really good ambassador of the program, you really have, most of the guys that are graduating now or they're getting to the AHL, they're getting to the East Coast League, but they're not, making these mega NHL deals to where, if they call Mark Hollis and say, hey, if I donate, can we look to improve this program? There's no pressure like that going on. So, that's another thing interesting to see with this hire that I think helps to have the alum is, does he bring some NHL guys back into the fold and kind of reinvigorate, how they feel? And it's a tough situation. If you're an NHL player, you don't really want to hurt another alum and talk bad about Tom. So, that was probably a tough thing going on with that era. Whereas when you had Conway here, they were not afraid to share their opinion of someone who wasn't an alum. But yeah, I think the development was huge, and it just seemed like you could never get things at the right time. When you had Jake Hildebrand, his team couldn't score.
Yeah.
And then this past season, they scored pretty decently. I mean, especially compared to where they had been at under Tom, they looked really good. Able to score when they needed to. They could get the power play going a little bit. And the goaltending absolutely fell off after Hildebrand left. So, you just could never get everything together at once. And it's a tough break for him. But, as Mark said when he was like, wins and losses do matter to a lot of people. And it just kind of became that time.
Did you Mark Hollis got a lot of criticism for hanging on to Anastas so long, giving him a rollover contract extension after a bad year. He said 5 years wasn't enough, but at the same time, you look at a Penn State and they start a program from scratch and make the NCAA tournament within a few years, to which Hollis oddly said that was an advantage. Did Anastas, I know because hockey recruiting is different, as we said. Was it fair to give Anastas this much time, or would it have been fair to evaluate him in the program after, say, 4 years? Like, obviously, football coaches, you get like 2-3 years and you're done. Hockey is a little bit different. Do you think Hollis was correct in his assessment in terms of waiting, or do you think without the benefit of hindsight, do you think I know people have been calling for changes for years. Do you think that was fair?
Honestly, I think when it really got kind of bad for me was year 5. I think that it would have been tough.
Which was last year, correct?
Right, correct. I think it would have been tough after year 4, even though year 4, functionally, they were nowhere near the NCAA tournament. They were a team that was carried by Jake Hildebrand. So Matt, at the end of the school year, had a chance to win the Big Ten on the last weekend of the season. They finished second behind Minnesota. But they got a bye in the Big Ten tournament. They're right there. So, it had a little bit of the upswing, but I think on paper and the records or where they finished, that looked good. But in all honesty, they were nowhere near the NCAA tournament by the pairwise. I think they were in the 30 range, which, is nowhere close to getting in. So, but you couldn't probably let him go. I mean, people were very excited. He seemed really close to winning the league there that last weekend. That's a tough time to let him go. But when you come back to year 5 the next year and you drop off in wins and I think they only got 9, maybe they got to 10 and got to double digits, but you get,
And they were uncompetitive against Michigan for kind of the first time.
Yeah, they really just, and of course that was the year where Michigan was back in the tournament. So they had Larkin, they had JT Compher, they were doing great. So maybe after year 5 you could have made a change, but I think at that point, I definitely understand Hollis's point where he had been back in Anastas for so long, didn't want to pull the trigger, give him one more chance again. But this year it just dropped off too much. When you go down in win total again after an already down year, it's kind of tough to see him coming back.
Now, this came together MSU kind of made a move pretty quickly. Compare that to Michigan with Red Berenson announcing his retirement yesterday.
Yeah.
How big was it that, MSU was able to kind of get their guy and not have to worry about? Because if Red Berenson had retired after the year, Michigan would have gotten its pick ahead of MSU. How important was that to not get a head start, but at least a head start on Michigan making a search at the same time?
It really depends. I think that would have to play out in a world where maybe Danton turns down Hollis, because I think it was pretty clear that the two leaders for Mark were probably George Gwozdecki and Danton Cole, who I both think maybe would have gotten a call. Like Danton maybe would have gotten a call from Michigan, but of course, if both are calling, one is your alma mater, one's not. Where it would have impacted them is if they're both going after the same candidates, if they both are calling Nate Lehman from Providence, or they're both calling Norm Bazin from Lowell, or some of the other big names that are out there. I think it definitely would have hurt MSU, because I think there's no way you can, say that MSU would win that battle. I think Michigan would pay the coach higher, and they would also be much closer to getting a winning product on the ice. Mm-hmm. But I think because they had Danton and he was kind of the guy, it definitely could have hurt if he turned them down. They were still searching now that he retired. But I think they did. I think Hollis did a pretty good job. I know he made a point of saying that he got a big list together this time. He didn't really interview that many, but it seems like he went through a longer process and more of a vetting than he did under the Anastas hire, which I think is good. I think whether it was a fault of Hollis's or not, it appeared that he didn't do enough of that before the Anastas hire, which kind of already took a hire that a lot of people questioned and made it worse when he first started. And that's tough for Tom to walk into. So I think there'll be a much more cohesive fan base and kind of feeling around Danton's hire than there was under Tom, and that's a good thing.
Now, to finish up here, kind of state of the program right now. They're coming off the worst season in like 40 years.
Yeah.
Penn State is NCAA tournament team, but at the other flip side, Michigan was awful. Minnesota's not doing great. Wisconsin has rebounded. Ohio State's kind of what they are. Notre Dame's coming into the league. How long do you think until it's kind of fair to start evaluating Cole on the program, considering, he's starting from almost rock bottom here? How long do you think until it becomes kind of a fair evaluation of him, and what do you think the outlook for the program is now?
Yeah, so I think a fair evaluation is you need to give him probably at least 4 to 5 years to see where they're at. As far as becoming, I think in 4 to 5 years, he should be pushing to win the league in the regular season, pushing to be in the NCAA tournament, regardless of a playoff tournament win or not. But I think, next year is kind of hard to know. I think that, like I said, the best class is coming in. There should be a strong freshman and sophomore class. But the goaltending this year was so up and down, so inconsistent, and really neither goalie kind of took the net. And those are the same two goalies you've got next year. So unless we see a big jump forward from one of the goaltenders, it could be a repeat next year, possibly finishing last in the league. Notre Dame's coming in, but Notre Dame's if they can get 2 of their players back, they're probably looking at being a contender for a national championship. So it's not going to help MSU get out of the basement. So I think MSU will probably be in the bottom of the league with an Ohio State, with maybe a Michigan down there, depending on their hire and how that goes. But I definitely think,
man, that's so weird to think about with Michigan.
Yeah,
I watched a little bit of. I didn't watch a ton of college hockey this year, but I watched their games against MSU. That was the worst. The record ended up showing it, but I said at the time of those games that it was the worst Michigan team I'd ever seen in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Just some of the staples of the Red era, the power play, cross ice pass on the doorstep, they couldn't do anything, and I just couldn't believe what they were. MSU's been, down in the dumps for a decade now, but Michigan's fall was slow in some ways, but quick in others. So
yeah, absolutely.
Now it's interesting, but they'll be able to. They have the talent. They will get talent. They can rebuild that. MSU's kind of got to restart this, start from the ground up.
Yeah, and so I think, hopefully what I would like to see from Dan is hopefully, the schedule hasn't come out, but I would like to see, it'd be important for him to hopefully get some nice wins out of conference because, again, the Big Ten, unfortunately, and maybe when years that were good, but unfortunately now that we're not that great, you only have 6 other league opponents, and they're all looking in pretty good shape right now, comparative to where MSU is. So you can't really count on a nice weekend of going to play Alaska or playing someone who's a little rough like you could in the CCHA. So, fans probably shouldn't be that surprised if this team does find its way back into last place in the Big Ten next season. But I do think help is on the way. I think that, Drew DeRidder's a goalie that's supposed to come here, not next season, but the season after, and he's got a lot of hype about him. So I think if you get Denton and get his system in there, he's played with overmatched kids. Like I said, he plays with 17-year-olds against 20-year-olds in the USHL all the time. So he's used to having a little bit, undergunned. So it won't be a quick rise, but like I said, I think 3 to 4 years. And I know he said in the press conference today, in 3 years, his goal is to be, did you see MSU win their first round in the Big Ten tournament and then win the Big Ten? And then, he kind of wants to build like that, maybe win a conference series within 2 to 3 years in the tournament with the tournament format changing. Then let's get to challenging for the Big Ten in year 3 or 4 and kind of pushing into where we're in the NCAA tournament by year 4 and 5. So I think that's a pretty steady, increase. It's not going to be easy. He's recruiting. We weren't playing Minnesota and Wisconsin when Anastas was hired and when Conley was here. So that's 2, elite programs he's now got to play against, and same with Penn State. So it's going to be a tough way to get there, but I think with Danton, we have a much better chance of making that rise than what we had before.
So you think for the first time in quite a while, do you think this is maybe the most optimistic you've been about the future of MSU hockey in quite some time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, and there's some more optimism. I mean, my thing now is I want to see what happens with what type of staff can Danton put together. His assistant at the US NTTB was also an MSU alum named Chris Luongo. I'm interested to see if he follows Danton to East Lansing. I know Danton he said he was going to sit down with the current assistants, and they'll probably see if, how that can work out. Do they want to stay on, or what's going to happen if he's going to keep them or not? So I definitely think there's a cause for optimism. I mean, it was just, whether it was all Tom's fault or not, like he said, he captained Conway's recruits. He tried to do some right things, but it was hard just to see the light at the end of the tunnel with a team that just year after year by Christmas was under 500, and you just couldn't see how they were going to pull out of it. I think that there's much more cause for optimism right now with Danton Cole in charge, just because he has years of coaching experience that you can point to before MSU and say there was some success there. And unfortunately for Tom, the tough part was he just couldn't even point back to old things and say, hey, when I was in this program or in this other team, I got things going. So just trust me. That was a tough row for him, to get down. So I think with Danton, you can say, hey, he's had success at the Griffins. He's had success at the USNTDP. He had success at getting Alabama Huntsville to get through a playoff and get to the NCAAs. So, let's just see what he can do with what he's got right now, and keep an eye on who he starts getting commitments from and see if things kind of change there as well.
Yep. We're a long way from the days of those long home sellout streak and top 5 team and everything like that. But if there's a path back to that, it starts today, and it'll take a while. But I think this hire has been pretty universally praised, and so we'll see where it goes from there. Thanks, Jeremy, for hanging out. Thanks everybody for listening. Make sure you check out theonlycolors.com for other hockey coverage and baseball and other stuff going on right now. Not sure when Austin and I will be back doing something until there's something to talk about. But thanks, guys, for listening to this one. Thanks, Jeremy, again for coming on. And we'll talk to you guys later. See ya.
See ya.